Hello and welcome to Oriental Empires. Now you may have seen some footage of this already around the web. The game has been in closed beta for a little while now, but I thought I would provide a summary of what the game is and what it isn't, and what I think of it. So Oriental Empires is a turn-based 4X game set in China, beginning in the early Bronze era, taking you all the way through to the Imperial era. It's being created by Shining Pixel Studios, which is seemingly a very small studio of just a handful of people. I say seemingly as I tried to find out more about them, but can't find too much information. However, Shining Pixel is headed by Rob Smith, lead designer and project director on Medieval 2 Total War, who previously founded Entronium Games and created Armada 2526, a spacefaring 4X game in 2010. Their current website is a bit dated, however it does say they are hiring, and Iceberg Interactive are publishing the title on Steam. I've reached out to them to find out the price of the game, but I haven't heard back as of yet. Now you might ask why any of this is relevant, but I like to know as much about a developer when going into a game as I can. Knowing a small indie dev is making a game can sometimes persuade you to try out their game, support what they're doing in the genre in the hopes that they can improve it and make it better. In this case, I'm just not sure. It's definitely a small budget title, but there just isn't any info out there or credits in the game just yet. Oriental Empires is fully turn-based, not a mixture of real-time and turn-based as it can sometimes seem. The best comparison to make is Civilization. Civilization, of course, is a turn-based game set on a hex map where you interact with some very high-level gameplay in order to manage settlements and wars. Oriental Empires is similarly set on a hex map, but goes deep rather than wide. By limiting themselves to just one culture, they open themselves up to a breadth of customization and depth that is otherwise missing in competing games. It allows for a greater sense of immersion, as you can see and feel your armies, generals, and townspeople, rather than having 6 legionnaires fight 4 musketeers. Before I get into the gameplay, I want to stress that this is a beta build and may not be representative of the final product. That said, the game is scheduled for a September release, so I'd imagine major changes aren't going to happen. I've come across a lot of bugs, however in my experience with programming, nothing so far seems overly complex to fix, but the sheer amount of them might cause delays or issues. Alright, so getting into the gameplay, there are 15 factions to pick from, with 10 being locked from the outset. By playing a campaign to turn 200, the other factions will unlock. To me, this seems a bit arbitrary. The factions vary slightly in traits and difficulty, but I feel like the player would have a better experience if they could just choose their own more suited playstyle from the start. At any time you can zoom all the way down to get the perspective of the person on the ground. The first time I did this I was really impressed with the transition from high level map gameplay to low level terrain and troop detail. When zoomed in, the trees, towns and farms all somehow look to scale, and then zooming out they look like a visual representation of what's there, even though they're one and the same. It's a really impressive look I haven't quite seen done in a game before. That said, the graphics aren't particularly impressive. The models themselves look acceptable, but the animations are very stiff, and the overall aesthetic, while quite realistic, can be a bit lacking in colour and fine detail. Upon starting out, you'll have one city, some settlers and an army. This is the early Bronze Age, though not actually defined on any timeline. It's more like Age of Empires, where you can transition to the next technological era, leaving your rivals behind. Because of this, early gameplay mostly consists of founding new cities with settlers, building farms and clearing land. You'll be ending turns fairly rapidly, as there generally isn't much to do. There isn't much in the way of city development in the beginning, as you won't have the money to afford the upkeep of the buildings, nor do you have any need for most of them for about 20 turns anyway. The tech tree itself is broken into 4 categories, and you can research in each category independently. There is some crossover, such as requiring a tech from knowledge to get one in power. For the most part, it's fairly straightforward, however it can be difficult to know what the tech is resulting in because of a lack of tooltips, which is a fairly big problem for new players. For example, the technology irrigation gains access to building irrigated farms, however there's no detail on what that actually gives you. Does irrigated farms give you better growth, more money, faster building? I couldn't be sure until the tech was done, and I could then check in the building panels. Edicts can also be issued, and in fact need to be issued, to move into the next era of technology. They usually cost a certain amount of gold for some major effect on the game. As you progress through technology and expand your borders, you'll begin to come across dilemmas, resources and bandits. Dilemmas are small little story-based events that usually help your nation for a small price. Resources come in the form of animals, precious metals and fertile land, usually ideal for founding a new city next to. Lastly, bandits are wandering armies that will harass your lands unless defeated. If an army sits in your territory, it will loot and burn whatever resources you have in that tile, be it a building, farm, or whatever else. Bandits are little more than a nuisance to you, though with enough numbers can be a formidable force that can destroy entire towns. Combat is quite interesting, though very hard to understand, at least for me. An army can be made up of 8 units on one hex. On this hex, they can be arranged in different formations. You can order what direction your army faces, which is who they'll prioritize fighting. You can then arrange how many lines in your army with a maximum of 4. Then you can swap around the units to say who goes in what line, archers at the back, spears at the front, or whatever else you fancy. Lastly, each unit has 8 different behaviours you can set before battle. Attack and charge, harass, outflank and ambush, defend, reserve and withdraw. This all combines together to become your overall battle plan for your army. However, the main problem with the game for me is the disconnect between what I feel I'm ordering my troops to do versus what the outcome of the battle is. Let's say I have 2 spearmen and 2 axemen. I set the spears to defend and the axemen to outflank. The spears get attacked and the axemen run so far off into the other hexes that they never really reach the battle in time to end their flank. At first I thought it was a bug, my units surely shouldn't travel across hexes, I thought. But no, multiple hexes become the battlefield, in what often becomes a confusion of units hurling together. Couple this with multiple armies on multiple hexes and it's anybody's guess who will win. Sometimes what my battle plan was worked out well, laying an ambush in trees or just holding the line often does work. But my main problem is understanding the scale and size of battles. There's no clear definition of how far units will travel to enter a battlefield. Should my flanking units be in adjacent hexes? I'm overall not too sure. This can be alleviated with greater tutorials, explanations and UI improvements to show what's happening. In principle, I feel like the battle system is really cool. You're setting a complex battle plans and rolling a dice to see if it was smarter than the enemies. Your plans aren't always final, your units can run and regroup, and engagements normally last multiple turns so you can try and try again. Siege battles are another story that I'm getting to grips with. I had a town rebel against me because they had no garrison force and world events kind of led them to be unhappy, while I fought a war up to the north, which I'll get to in a minute. This became a problem however. The town that rebelled was my capital and had a wall. I had no equipment to breach walls. I researched fire arrows, gathered my forces and attacked. Now attacking means that you'll only just click the town to attack, and you'll see what happens with your battle plans. However, my battle plans never executed well. My archers all fired at different spots on the wall, only 1 or 2 units would attempt an attack at the gate, and general confusion led me to losing multiple times, even having my army defect to the rebels. So I did a lot of reading and tried to figure out what was going on. So it turned out that the rebellion I had was a peasant rebellion, so my peasant armies would defect if they were in their territory. However, if my leader led the army, they wouldn't. Recruiting nobles was also another way to prevent defection. Pretty cool concept in my opinion about the class divide of public order. So I gathered my noble armies, researched some artillery, and made another go for it. 4 armies surrounding one town, bombarding it. Again, I never really had control of how we attacked. Ideally, the artillery would breach the wall from a distance, so I kept that in a hex a little bit further back than the main army. We'd rain in arrows, so I kept my archers on harass mode, which means they prioritize missile. And then infantry would attack the openings, so I kept them on charge. In reality, the missile fire fired all over the town, taking out towers and making breaches we couldn't reach. Some units would enter, some would fall back, and the battle would rage for multiple turns. I probably loaded the outcome about 8 times until I got the battle plan or armies the right configuration until we could win. It took around 6 turns of pillaging and sieging to finally win, also because of my ally who attacked a couple times. It was fun, it was cool, and difficult, but very confusing. I hope the AI can become a little bit better or the control given to the player a little bit more definitively, like target the north gate for sieges for example, as you can set defenders within a town to different sides, so it's definitely in there, north, south, east and west. Diplomacy plays a big role in the campaign too. Had I not formed an alliance with the Bat to my south, I couldn't have defeated the rebels or gained a truce with my enemy to allow me to divert attention locally. So far, diplomacy has worked great. Allies have helped me, given me money and traded. Enemies have called their allies to war, and when we get a truce, all parties agree to it, not just the original person who declared the war. It's been a great system. Trading between nations either seems to be absent or I couldn't find it. It seems trade is internal only, but I would like to see a system whereby connecting roads to allies allows for trade. It would even perhaps be rated. Lastly is province management. Again, it can be a bit overwhelming, but each city has its own immediate surrounding territory which you can build on, be it farms, mines, monasteries or other buildings you've researched. Inside the town itself is its own building panel for internal buildings, such as workshops, barracks, armories, granaries, and more. A building browser that ties to the tech tree is definitely needed to get a good grasp on what you need to build and how to make money, as I found it tricky to provide a steady income that wasn't just coming from farms. Population and growth is affected by a food surplus, which is also tied to happiness and unrest, which is broken into nobles and peasants. I couldn't really figure out many ways to affect either parties directly, but keeping a garrison in towns is always an effective way of stomping out rebellions. Basically, build and protect farms, get money and growth, build more armies, more towns, and find more resources. So that's Oriental Empires. What do I think of it all? I think it has great potential. The setting is wonderful and, for me, unexplored. The main things holding it back right now are its UI. It really does need a clearer UI. A building browser, description of what will happen in a battle given a certain formation, and more information panels for settlements would greatly help the player make informed decisions and become less frustrated. Multiplayer is locked out of the beta right now, but I imagine it would be great to play against friends or with multiple people. Everyone gives orders at the same time, and all orders are carried out across the world, so games would actually go quite quickly. For me, this is a more focused Civilization game. I loved Civilization 4, and I never really got into Civilization 5, though I know it's an extreme favourite amongst, everybody. Oriental Empires taps into the one more turn mentality of Civilization, but grounds it more in reality, where you can execute your battle plans, become familiar with your leaders and their family. It just goes one layer deeper in terms of gameplay design. Not to say that it's more or less deep than a Civ game, it just removes a layer of high-level concepts from the game. Towns have classes of population, not just a citizen. Disbanding units increases the amount you can recruit, like they're really there. Your leaders die and aren't just famous people like Napoleon in the Bronze Age. Your armies have hundreds of troops, not just 5 or 6. The gameplay is ultimately similar between the two, but one is a step further removed from reality. I personally like immersion in my games, and I like to see as many literal concepts implemented as possible, while also being able to view what that looks like. It's why I gravitated to Total War. Population, armies, sickness, finances, and technology, all the practical things that went into running an empire, and all visible either on the map or in the battles. I hope to cover the game closer to release. In the meantime, if you like this video, I'll make sure to get my hands on it in future and let you know how it's progressed. Either way, I think Iceberg and Shining Pixel Studios could have something very special on their hands. It just needs a layer of polish right now, and I applaud them for carving out their own niche in a very competitive genre. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you in the next one.